In this lecture, we're going to examine some of the foundational principles underlying research ethics. And what we're specifically going to aim to achieve here is that we're going to first define research ethics, examine factors that can affect ethical research. We're then going to describe a various list of different levels in which research ethics and the different roles different individuals serve in order to maintain ethical behavior. And then we'll conclude with a discussion of the historical development of research ethics as the foundation of current practice. When we think about ethics, ethics is basically defined as the application of moral principles concerning what an individual considers right and wrong that will help to guide one's decisions and behavior. In terms of research ethics, this definition is the foundation for establishing very clear guidelines in order to ensure that the decisions that are made in the research process fits this basic foundation. And there are three different perspectives in understanding ethics. The utilitarian perspective is one in which decisions are done for the greatest good for the largest number of people. The altruistic perspective is somewhat similar to the utilitarian perspective in that it involves helping others without personal benefit, and these are selfless actions. One such example is the case of Dr. Norman Borlaug, who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970. Dr. Borlaug was an agricultural scientist from Minnesota who developed a new strain of wheat that was much shorter and was disease and weather resistant to damage. And once he made his discovery, he willfully exported that discovery and knowledge to various countries throughout the world that had a difficult time from an agricultural perspective in growing a much needed food source. So Dr. Borlaug applied a utilitarian perspective, and instead of waiting for patents to be filed and keeping the discovery to a very small company, he decided to basically give it away, and in a sense acted selflessly. Quite the opposite to these perspectives is egoism, where individuals act in accordance with their own self-interests. From a research perspective, this raises the case of Eric Pullman, who was a Canadian researcher working in the United States. And because Dr. Pullman acted in his own self-interest to advance his research, he was found to be guilty of data fabrication and was sentenced to a term in U.S. federal prison. The link below here, An Unwelcome Discovery, is an article in the New York Times that chronicles the Eric Pullman affair. In terms of how research ethics are governed, these policies are governed by at the federal level and within individual institutions. An interesting article published in 2010 in the journal Nature was one that addressed the need for Canadian institutions to take research misconduct more seriously. And as a result, various institutions and organizations developed policies that addressed research ethics and specifically research misconduct. So the Canadian Association of University Teachers developed a policy statement for research misconduct as a serious breach of what is considered good research practice, and we'll talk about some of those foundational policies in this unit, but includes a number of actions that would be classified as misconduct. Those actions include falsification, fabrication, which is basically just making up numbers that didn't exist, plagiarism, whether all of that is conducted willfully or through gross negligence. So ignorance is not an excuse here for scientists when if they are found to be in breach of sound research practice. And various other details on the CAUT policy statement can be found at the link below. So ethical research misconduct has existed for a long time. It currently exists, and it will always exist because of the various factors that can affect ethical research. The first one is scientific competition, where researchers that investigate the same topic are competing with others that have those interests. And so oftentimes researchers are driven by who will find the answer first. And the first person that comes out with the discovery is the one that is often remembered in history. Societal norms can often drive violations to sound ethical research practice. And societal norms refer to some of those practices that are not quite as defined as many policies are laid out, and those exist within a discipline or an organization. And when left undefined, that will foster scientific competition. So what's very critical for researchers to adhere to are what I call the 3 Ps. The 3 Ps are policy, procedure, and practice. Policies and procedures are negotiated and established guidelines within institutions and organizations that will dictate what people can and cannot do from a research perspective. Practice refers to previous ways in which things are done that aren't necessarily outlined in policies and procedures. And so, although previous ways in which tasks are carried out within an organization, previous practice may be beneficial, it should still be kept with a close, it should be monitored closely in order that policies and procedures are not violated. One such example within universities is offering extra credit to students in courses for participating in research studies. And the question is whether this is fair. Is it fair to offer such inducements? Is it fair to students who wish to earn extra credit, who don't wish to participate in various research projects? And so, although there's no clear-cut answer to this question here, many institutions are currently developing policies that address the offering of extra credit to students in courses. And so it would be helpful to start thinking about what are the potential courses or concerns that may arise in courses when it comes to offering extra credit. Political influences are always present in the research process, and this mainly goes to the need for obtaining external funding for research. Much research requires the use of personnel and supplies, which is often expensive and a very important item to carry out the research. And so researchers are always looking for applying for external funding. One of the problems with this that may lead to unethical research are those research activities that are now starting to be what I call tailored around the hope of landing funding. So some funding mechanisms at the federal level target very specific topics to investigate, and some researchers may start to use that to drive their research questions. Some research activities may impress influential people. So some research activities that address items that are of concern within society may get the attention of politicians or high-level administrators in universities, and that may drive a person to find significant results that may not be there. So the opportunity to gain status within an organization, monetary gain, and getting into a position to make decisions that affect others are often factors that would lead one to engage in research misconduct. The fourth factor here refers to trendy research, and that's really following what other people are doing in terms of their research activities. What's the hot topic of the day is usually what drives some people to carry out some research activities. And so the problem with engaging in new research that others are doing, very often those research questions will go unanswered. So one example is research addressing COVID-19 disease. It's a very important item to research. Many people are engaged in researching COVID-19 disease, but when we think about researchers that now are moving their research program in this direction, a question that cannot be answered right now, but should be questioned on an individual basis, is whether this research right now is utilitarian, altruistic, and does it involve egoism. It really depends upon the researchers in question. And so I think it's very easy to see how all three of these perspectives can be motivations for starting a new line of research along COVID-19. And so the conduct of ethical research relies primarily on the researcher. And the researcher should examine previous relevant work. And critical to this is the literature review. And the researcher must identify and acknowledge previous studies. Because of the motivation of being the first one to discover a new item in a particular line of study, some researchers will willfully ignore previous studies so as to present themselves as the first one that discovered a particular finding. The researcher should identify potential sources of error not just in previous studies, but more importantly within their own work. So identifying the limitations of their research capabilities starts with the limitation of instruments or equipment that they are using as part of their investigations. And a very critical way to address this is to perform what's called pilot work. And that's where the researcher will start to engage in experimental procedures that are not necessarily publishable, but will establish the foundation of their own work within their own research group, so that when they are ready to carry out a formal research study, that the methodological steps are sound. So this ends the first part of our Unit 3 lecture on ethical research.